To celebrate our 70th anniversary as Kinoole Baptist Church, we are beginning a three-part series entitled Kinoole Past, Present, and Future. And so in staff meeting, guess who gets to talk about the past? And the oldest person, that's me. Which is okay. And in staff meeting, we also talk about the misery formula. You know what the misery formula is? Expectation is here, and if reality is down there, whatever the distance is misery. So if you lower your expectations, you're less miserable. So I just want to lower your expectations. If you are here expecting a very carefully exegeted sermon today on the Great Commission, we're not going to have that. So lower your expectations, and you will be less miserable for the next 20 minutes. Okay? But we are going to focus on the Great Commission, and we're going to look at it, that and the past 70 years here at Kinoole. And I was telling the first service that when we do these memory verses, it's in the NIV, and some of these verses I memorized when I was a child, and somehow the way my brain works is it gets stuck in there as King James. So when I have to memorize it in another version, I get really messed up with the words. And this is how I remember Matthew 28. Jesus came and spake unto them, saying, all power has been given to me on heaven and on earth. Go ye therefore, teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. Amen. But this is how you're going to see it this morning. This is the NIV. Then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age. And so, missionaries in the past and even today, missionaries respond to the command of Jesus to go and make disciples by venturing out into sometimes uncharted areas. They obey Jesus' command, and they trust his promise that he will always be with them. And that is the beginning of Kinoole Baptist Church. We're going to look at a lot of pictures today. So the first slide. This is Dr. and Mrs. Charles Leonard. In 1945, as World War II was coming to an end, communism was gaining ground in China, and eventually all our missionaries who were in China were pulled out, and they were reassigned. And that's kind of when the work in Hawaii began, because a lot of the missionaries who were pulled out from China ended up coming to different places in Hawaii, Maui, Kauai, Oahu, and here. And Dr. and Mrs. Charles Leonard and Reverend and Mrs. Tucker Calloway were assigned to Hilo. It was the first place for Southern Baptist missionaries in Hilo. And when they came, there was already a Southern Baptist Sunday school class meeting in a clubhouse up in Kaumana, and it was being led by a Japanese language teacher, and his name was Reverend Jiro Shiroma. And it began with just one family, the Yoshio Fukamizu family. You know, try to put yourself in that place. You think it was easy to obey the command of Jesus? One teacher, one family. They're probably trusting Jesus. So the missionaries, when they came, they started organizing Bible classes all in the community, trying to reach people. They had Bible classes in Waikiauka Camp 2, and Waikiauka Camp 2, I think, is right over here, or used to be. Waikia Mill, kind of down where I think that hotel is right now, Waikia Mill. That's where the sugar mill was. You know, it was easier in the first service. They all knew where it was when I said Waikia Mill. Also in Ho'olulu Housing, Wyman Field Housing, Waikia Waina, kind of where the school is today, Waikia Uka, and Puna. And we have this picture here. This is Mrs. Terry Mihara. She was teaching a Sunday school class in the house lots, the Ho'olulu housing area, which is now where the Civic Auditorium is. And some of you who do the visiting for our care homes and things like this, you know who that is, Mrs. Mihara. And she was leading a Sunday school class back in the real early days when they were just trying to get work started. This is a Bible class that was organized up in the Waikiauka Camp 4 clubhouse. And I remember that clubhouse because I'm old. But I remember visiting my grandparents, and I remember the clubhouse right in the plantation area. Now, I don't know those kids because this is like 1946 or 47. But I know for sure that my Uncle George, you see the man in the center? That's Tucker Calloway. And two people to the right, that's my Uncle George. Not the one you all know. This one is my mom's younger brother. And he was the first Christian in our family. And I think also in that picture, I have two aunties, you know, his two younger sisters of his, and his younger brother. That's Uncle Herbert. I don't know which one, but I think they're all standing there. Well, you know, this changed our whole family because almost all his siblings, younger siblings, became Christians after this. And then his older sister was my mom. But you know, the missionaries probably had to go house to house, all in these areas, looking for people, trying to round up enough people to start classes. And I think most of them were children that they rounded up because all the people, all the adults were all Japanese immigrants. And so the people they rounded up were their kids who spoke English. And do you think that's easy? When we started the Puna mission, and some of you who come currently, maybe not in this service, were in this group, we had to go and knock door to door in Pahoa and Puna area. And people sometimes are not nice. But you try to find who was receptive. And I'm just imagining that they probably had the same experience, going house to house, trying to find people who would be open. But they trusted Jesus to never leave them, and so they obeyed, and they kept at it. And by November 17, 1946, they had enough adults. And so the Hilo Baptist Church was organized with 18 charter members. This was the original parsonage. Tucker Calloway was named the pastor. They purchased this lot. Soon afterwards, there was that house, and some of you remember that house, old parsonage. In this one, it looks pretty nice, because it was almost like really big for that time. And this whole property was purchased. Of course, we tore down that house about 20 years ago. This is the first church auditorium that they decided to build. It was over here, I think. And this was the one that was built with lumber salvage from the 1946 tidal wave wreckage of Army buildings. And this building was renovated in the early 70s by a church member named Whitey Lockwood. And this became Lockwood. And I remember when we were trying to do that renovation, we found out it wasn't really square. Because they were trying to put the panels on the floor and it would never come out straight. So you were telling me, this is really off. But this is salvage lumber, right? And this is the first one. In fact, if you can see the sign on the front, you can't, but it says on that sign on the left, it says Hilo Baptist Church. That was the name. So the church began to grow. They decided to build a new auditorium. And so they started this thing called Buy a Brick campaign. Buy a Brick. We're sitting here right now. Buy a Brick campaign. Now, so there was some money also from the Foreign Mission Board, and back then that's what was called the Lottie Moon Christmas offering that helped them to do the construction. But can you imagine what kind of undertaking this was for a congregation of less than 100 people, most of whom were not adults? They trusted that Jesus would see them through this. And this is where we are today. We're sitting in it. In 1952, in February, they decided that they were going to have to change. They decided they wanted to change the name of the church. And because they had started another church up in Kaumana Drive, and it was going to be called Kaumana Drive Baptist Church. And so they decided we need to have another name, because we're not the only church in Hilo. And so they took suggestions from the congregation, and this is how it came out. Calvary got 5, Grace got 1, Trinity got 2, and Kinoole got 13. There's about 19 people that decided on the name of this church. But I think that was a good choice. I'll bet that we are the only church in the whole world that's called Kinoole Baptist Church. What do you think? Because if we had picked Calvary, how many Calvary? Yeah, so, Well, the construction started and was finished, and on March 23, 1952, the new church auditorium was dedicated. This is this building, from probably looking from over there. Okay. Reverend H.B. Ramser was the pastor then. And perhaps as we look at this milestone, we can realize what a trust and obey event this was for the members of that time. What an undertaking it was. Maybe about 30 years later, by that time, there was wear and tear on this building. And we decided, okay, by then I was already here. Decided we needed to renovate the auditorium. And we were pastorless at that time. And if you can tell, I don't know if you can tell, but this is looking at this stage. That sign, it says, "Together we build, not equal gifts, but equal sacrifice." And it was hanging right up there. And if you can tell, there was nothing up here except the beam, the wood beams. Because the original ceiling was Kanic. I don't know if you know what Kanic is today, but it was this material. It was made out of, cane, sugar cane, and it had pukas in it. And I remember as a kid, puka is a hole. It was full of holes. That's how it was. And so it was up on the ceiling. I remember sitting back there, as a 12-year-old, really bored. And so I would count how many holes there were in each tile. Then I would count how many tiles there were. And I would figure out how many holes there were in the ceiling, because I was bored. But all of that started to fall out. And so we had to renovate. And at that time, in 1985, we were pastorless when we began this Together We Build campaign. There were many people who thought, you can't do it. It's not going to happen. Even members from our convention talked to me and said, you can't do it now because you don't have a pastor. And what added to it was the committee that we had formed to really focus on our anniversary. We turned that into the Together We Build campaign committee, and it was all women. And I think that is why they thought this is not going to work. But when we did the campaign and all the pledges were received, it exceeded what the committee thought we would get. Members were challenged to seek the Lord's guidance. And so the auditorium renovation was completed, and the rededication of the auditorium was held in 1989. That view is right above the baptistry, because when they took off all the walls and everything, it was riddled with termite debris. And that's why we had to do it. So this whole section over here it's all been done over. With most building projects, it is a challenge. It's a real challenge to trust that God is leading. And as I was looking through all the pictures, what stood out to me was not the building or buildings, but was how did Kinoole obey Jesus' command to make disciples? That's the main focus of the verse, to make disciples. And when I looked at the pictures, most of the people in the pictures, especially in the beginning, let's say 10, 15 years of the church, were young adults, maybe in their 30s and 40s, probably because this area was mainly Japanese families, immigrant families, and so the people they reached were their English-speaking children. One of their fellowships. I was looking at this with the 8 o'clock. Some of them remember these people, but the person standing on the far right is Dora Ebe Suzaki. And the person second from the left, that's the one I talked about last week, that's Mitsuko Tachibana. I think they're old because they're old enough to be my parents, but when I look at the pictures now, I think, boy, they were young. But they were leading the church. When I was looking through some of the old records, they had a high attendance day for Sunday school in about 1956, and they had over 200 people in Sunday school. Most of them under the age of 18. I'd say maybe only about 10 adults at the most. And those were teaching. And even though the church was being led by young adults, 30 to 40, they were willing to let teenagers start out by helping in Sunday school or even leading a discipleship program. When we first started coming, I was about 12, and I remember the person that was leading that discipleship program, I think he was still a teenager, was Mildred Arai's oldest son, Norman. I thought, wow. Making disciples is Jesus' command to every believer. That's the main point of our focus scripture today. When you look at that picture, even she didn't recognize herself. But Janet Nagasako is in that picture, standing right in front of the pulpit. And I think, Delna didn't recognize herself, but I think Delna is second from the right. Every believer is to make disciples, and Jesus assures us that as we obey his presence is constant. This is a Sunday school high attendance day in the early 80s, all out on this lanai here. I can't even find myself in there, but Candy said she could pick herself up. How do you disciple someone? You let them watch how you follow Jesus. As we become a part of each other's lives, we support and encourage each other not to give up, to keep following Jesus even when it's tough. This is our youth group or student ministry. in the early 80s. This is what it means to be members of one another. You depend on each other. I don't know if you can recognize anyone in that picture, but that's my sister, my younger sister. That next one is Audrey Oka, if anybody remembers Audrey. That next one is Jill Hasebe. And that one is Lynn Ibesuzaki. And on the bottom, that's her brother, Gary Ibesuzaki. And next to him is Mel Arai. Another thing about Kinoole, when I was kind of reflecting on it, is those whom God has called to ministry from this church. They used to use the phrase, sent out from this church. And here's what I came up with. Sent out from Kinoole, Dixon Yagi, missionary to Japan. Herbert Oshiro, minister of music, that's my uncle. Gino Takaki, he's the pastor of Haleiwa Baptist Church. Walter Kai, he was the pastor at Puna Baptist Church. Clarice Yagi Kaneshiro, she is the wife of Stephen Kaneshiro, who pastors Valley Isle Fellowship on Maui. Robert Ueda, we called him Bobby because we knew him when he was a child, but he is currently pastor at Hawaii Chinese Baptist Church on Oahu. Sean Cohen, he's a recent graduate of Golden Gate Seminary. Alden Arakaki, he is currently an associate pastor at Engage Church. Hannah Tomita, a recent graduate of Golden Gate. Carl Sunagawa, also recent graduate of Golden Gate and currently our youth minister apprentice. Lane Arakaki, he is a recent student ministry pastor in Colorado. Ray Kitagawa, who has been a chaplain in the Army, I think for over 40 years. And I was reminded by her mother, Jamie Drake Arakaki, who is married to Alden, so she's a pastor's wife. And also her brother, Randy Drake, who is studying in Simi Valley to go into the ministry. How's that? How's that for making disciples, Kinoole? To make disciples who make disciples. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old living with me right now. And Josiah is the older one. And he really knows how to push his sister's buttons. So I keep telling him, she's watching everything you do and she copies you. And he keeps doing it. I said, you can't do that. She's watching you, she's copying you, and he just does it. She goes, and what does she do? I mean, so I said, you have to think about what you're doing. She's copying everything you do. Each of us is called by Jesus to make disciples. Just like that boy, the little one, is Scott Kubo. Probably wondering, okay, what do we do now? So he's looking at, the one he's looking at is my nephew Alden. And I think the one in control is Hannah on the left. It's Daniel and Karen's daughter. But who are you watching? Who are you learning from? Who are you watching to learn how to follow Jesus no matter what? And then also, who is watching you? Now that is our past. That is who we were and who we are today. So will you say, that is who I am? Will you say, yes, I will. I will trust and obey Jesus so that I will be a disciple who leads others to do the same. Would that be your prayer today? So as our musicians come to lead us, if you have any kind of need that you would like prayed for or any decision to make, we'll be here at the front. So would you stand together as we sing?